On the morning of October 13th, 1972, 22-year-old rugby player named Nando Parado was sitting in a window seat somewhere over the Andes Mountains, or in Spanish they say Andes. He was probably joking around with the guy next to him, and then the plane suddenly dropped. And I want you to really picture that moment for a second. 1 second everything feels normal, and the next nothing makes sense anymore. He didn't know it yet, but he was never going to see his mother alive again, and his sister, who was sitting just a few rows away from him, she had maybe 3 weeks left to live. Now, before we get into what happened, I want you to know who Nando was, because this isn't just a disaster story. It is a story about a specific person, a real-life human being who had a life and plans and people he loved. Because when you understand who he was, this story hits very differently. So Nando was from Montevideo, which if you want to say it properly, which I already did, I guess, it also sounded like Montevideo, and that is in Uruguay. I'm using all my Spanish oral skills on these words, by the way. Nando was young, he was athletic, and he was a part of a mature rugby team called the All Christians Club, which I know sounds like a bad name, but stay with me. He was on his way to San Diego, which is in Chile, so they were going there for a match. The whole team was on this flight, 40 passengers and 5 crew members, friends, family members, supporters, and some of them were as young as 17 years old. Just imagine being 17 years old on a trip like this and not knowing what is coming. So they had stopped overnight in Mendoza, which if you really lean into it, it is pronounced Mendoza, and Mendoza is located in Argentina. They stopped there because of the bad weather over the mountains, and in the morning, even though the weather still was not great, they decided to take off anyway. And this is one of those decisions that seems small at the time, but it ends up changing everything. That one decision would cost 29 people their lives. Alright, this is Lure Film speaking. I make 3D animations, some of them I'm proud of, some of them I'm still figuring out. So if you like this one or if you absolutely hate it, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I read everything and I reply as much as I can. Alright, let's get right back into our story. So the co-pilot, his name was Lieutenant Dante Lugorara, and that's a really dope name. And he radioed in that they had passed the turning point. The turning point is basically the point where the plane was supposed to change direction and head towards San Diego. And he told them that they were beginning their descent into San Diego, but they hadn't passed the turning point. He had miscalculated their position. He did not account for the headwinds. And for those who do not know what headwinds are, these are strong winds that blow directly against the plane and slow it down. So they were being slowed down and he did not realize it. What he thought was open Chilean sky below him, but that was not the case. He was still in the middle of the Andes Mountains. He was 80 kilometers east of where he believed he was, and he was descending straight into the mountains. He was flying straight into something he could not even see properly. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the right wing of the plane clipped a peak. The wing sheared off, the tail ripped away, and the fuselage, and again for those who do not know what a fuselage is, it is just the main body. So inside the fuselage, there were still people buckled into their seats, and this fuselage skidded across a glacier, and it looked like a massive slow-moving sheet of ice, and it also looks like somebody was surfing down the mountain. And then the front of the fuselage slammed into a snowbank, which sent everyone inside slamming into the cockpit doors. It was not just a crash, it was violent, chaotic, and completely uncontrollable. And then there was silence, and then they started to scream. So they had come down in a remote valley in western Argentina, and this place would later be called Valle de las Lágrimas. I hope I said that very well in Spanish. If not, then it's unfortunate. If yes, then I guess I've reached the pinnacle of Spanish pronunciation. Yes, sorry about that. Alright, that Spanish word that I said, it translates to the Valley of Tears. And you will understand why it is called the Valley of Tears. It is standing at 11,500 feet above sea level. The temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, below zero. There is no signal, there is no visibility from the air, and there is definitely no way out of there. But what would not be the case for too long, if you were there, you would not even know where to begin. 13 people passed away on impact, and 3 more passed away that first night. That left 29 of them alive. Now, there is the detail that hit me the hardest when I was researching this, and it's not in the way that you think. The survivors looked west, and they assumed that Chilean civilization was just a few kilometers away from where they were, because the co-pilot before he passed away had told them that they had already crossed into Chile, but they hadn't. Civilization was actually 89 kilometers away from them. That is 55 miles through the most brutal mountain terrain on Earth, and they did not know that yet. And that false hope is what kept them going, but it also made everything so much worse. So here's what they had. They had 29 people, a broken fuselage, no shelter, no fire, no proper clothing, and for their food, they had some chocolate, some wine, and a few snacks from the plane. That was it. There was no backup plan. There was no second chance. There was just this. And yet, these guys, who were mostly teenagers, they started solving problems that would break most adults. One of them was Roberto Canessa. He was 19 years old, and he was a medical student. He was not even a qualified doctor yet, but he started draining infected wounds and resetting broken bones in the snow because somebody had to do it. There was no hesitation, there was no re-preparation, it was just responsibility. Another survivor was Firuz Strach, and he figured out how to melt snow into the drinking water by angling a metal sheet toward the sun. No fire, no tools, just thinking. They tied seat cushions to their feet so that they would not sink into the glacier, and they sealed up the fuselage with foam and luggage to block out the wind. And meanwhile, search planes from 3 different countries were flying directly overhead of them, and those planes could not see them. This part is honestly heartbreaking. The fuselage was white, and the glacier was white, so the fuselage was invincible from the air, and the survivors were down there screaming and waving, and the planes just kept going. And then on day 11, they found a transistor radio, which is a small portable radio device, and it picked up the news broadcast from Uruguay. Imagine listening this to the radio, saying that the search had been called off, that the world had declared them dead. Imagine hearing that while you're still alive. So there was no rescue coming, and their bodies were burning thousands of calories every day just to stay warm, and their food was almost gone, and nothing grows at this altitude, meaning at this extreme height where the air is thin and the conditions are harsh, no life would exist up there. So on day 10, which was October 22nd, they held a meeting, and I want you to imagine that meeting for a second. 19 and 20 years old kids inside a broken plane on a glacier, and they were deciding something that none of them would ever fully recover from. This is the moment where everything changes. They decided that they were going to eat the butts of the people who had already passed away, and they did not hurt anyone. They were their friends, they were their teammates, and in some cases they were their family members. That's what makes this so heavy. Roberto Canessa put it simply. He said that there was no other option. Either they did this or they all passed away, and everyone who was already gone, they would have passed away for nothing. One of the survivors later said, "Think of it only as meat." Even hearing that feels uncomfortable, and most of them carried that in silence for years. But underneath all of that, it was a group of young people choosing to live. They were saying, our lives are worth whatever this costs. And then came day 17, and that was when an avalanche hit. An avalanche is a massive rush of snow breaking loose and crashing downhill, and it buried the fuselage while they were sleeping. 8 more people passed away, and one of them was Marcelo Perez, who was the team captain, and he had been the one holding everyone together from day 1. And just like that, he was gone. They kept going, and they kept going anyway. So they had weeks of failed radio attempts. They had expeditions to the tail section of the plane. They even built a giant cross out of luggage in the snow, hoping that someone flying over would see it, and nothing worked. So on December 12, which was 2 months after the crash, Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa decided that they were going to walk out. And this is a decision that should not even have been possible. They had no map. They had no mountaineering experience. They had nothing, just a direction west, and 89 kilometers of wilderness between them and help. It took them 10 days, 60 kilometers on foot through the Andes, and they were doing this at altitude, meaning so high up that breathing becomes harder because there is less oxygen in the air. So every breath they took cost more than it should have. Every step they took felt heavier than the last one. On day 63, they reached the summit, which was 4,650 meters high, and instead of seeing Chile below them, they saw more mountains, endless mountains in every direction, and this is the moment that would break most people. However, Nando Parrado looked far ahead, and he found out that the mountains at the far end, they don't have snow anymore, and he believed that if we kept heading that direction, we can make it. So he looked at Roberto and told him about it, and he said, "We gotta have to do this. Are you in?" Roberto said, "This is suicide." And then he agreed to it. And they went ahead with it. And they just kept walking. On day 67, they saw a flower and a river. On day 68, they saw a rusted soup can and cows, which meant that people had been here. And on day 69, they saw a man on the other side of a roaring gorge, which is a deep, narrow valley with very steep sides. And they were too far away to hear each other. So the man on the other side of the gorge, he grabbed an empty paper and a pencil, wrapped it around the brook, and threw it to Nando Parado to write him a message. Nando Parado wrote, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan." And that one sentence carried everything. So basically a muleteer picked up that note. And a muleteer is a man who travels through the mountains using mules. The name of this muleteer was Sergio, and his full name was Sergio Catalan. And I hope I pronounced it well in Spanish. And he rode 10 hours through the night to reach the authorities. On December 22nd, the helicopters arrived, and 6 of the survivors were airlifted out. And on December 23rd, the rest of them were rescued. 16 people survived out of 45. Now here's the part that I genuinely was not ready for. 5 days after they were rescued, the press found out about the food and about the decision that they had to make. And those survivors, they stood in front of the cameras in Montevideo, and they told the whole truth publicly without hiding anything at all. And that takes a different kind of strength. The Catholic Church in Uruguay gave its blessing. They said that what these kids had done was survival. It was not a sin. And the families of the people who had passed away, many of them said that they would have wanted it that way. They said that keeping someone you love alive with your body is not a tragedy. It is the last gift that you can give someone. Roberto Canessa went on to become one of the Uruguay's most respected pediatric cardiologists, and he now spends his life saving children's hearts. And he says that the mountain gave him that. The mountain gave him the understanding that life is worth fighting for, no matter what it costs. And Nando Parado, the man who walked 60 kilometers through the Andes on foot and who threw that note across a gorge, he became a speaker. And he says that the mountain taught him one thing: love the people you love, because that's all there is. 72 days, the Valley of Tears, 16 people. They did not walk out of there because the world saved them. They walked out because they refused every single day to stop choosing each other. And honestly, that might be the most powerful part of this entire story. So I will leave you with this. If it was you on the mountain, what would you choose?